Good morning, thank you for having me with you. Today I will be discussing with you a recent project that we started at Evangel concerning folic acid deficiency and its role in embryonic development. Folic acid, to begin, is an essential B vitamin within the body. It aids in purine and thymidylate synthesis, which plays a role in DNA synthesis and repair within the body. You can see below that folic acid aids in a conversion of homocysteine to methionine, which is an essential amino acid that is not synthesized within the body. And homocysteine in the body acts as a toxin that will attack endothelial linings. And so we'll see throughout the presentation the importance of the conversion of homocysteine to methionine as we go along. So we have this homocysteine methionine cycle. And this is kind of outlining the procedure, or like the pathway. We see methionine is at the top, and a metabolite methionine is homocysteine, which is this toxin that I was talking about earlier. In the body, folic acid is converted to folate, which is the carboxylate anion, and in its active form, 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, it acts in a concomitant nature with vitamin B12 to remethylate homocysteine to methionine. And the pathway we see with vitamin B12 in the conversion of homocysteine to methionine is more commonly seen than the vitamin B6 conversion to cysteine. And so this is kind of what our research or proposal is focusing on. As I stated before, homocysteine weakens endothelial linings, and because of this we see with an accumulation of homocysteine in the body, there's an increased risk for cardiovascular diseases and for renal issues as well. Folic acid also reduces amyloid beta peptide toxicity, and an accumulation of this amyloid beta peptide is thought to be the precursor to plaques in Alzheimer's brains. And so we see that supplementation and increase in intake of folic acid can be linked with a reduction in the risk for Alzheimer's. A Hungarian study also linked folic acid to a decrease in behavioral problems in children. There were two groups that were studied. One was given a folic acid supplementation during pregnancy, during the development of the child, specifically within the first 4 weeks when the neural tube closes. And another group voluntarily went without the folic acid supplementation, and they were given assessments at birth within a few weeks of birth to analyze the behavioral patterns within the children, and then again after 18 months they were given the same assessment, and they were able to see that the group with the folic acid supplementation had seen a lower incidence in behavioral problems in their children than the group without the supplementation. So just to kind of review the functions of folic acid, it aids in the repair of DNA. It will help prevent the damage to endothelial linings by converting homocysteine to methionine. It helps reduce the risk for Alzheimer's and other behavioral problems. And now kind of switch the focus of the presentation to more of a research and proposal, as folic acid aids in the prevention of neural tube defects. In the early 1990s, Fulghum and his colleagues did research on rat embryos and determined the effect of methionine in the development of a neural tube. And within the first 18 hours of the rat's development, the group of embryos that were supplied with methionine had proper neural tube closure, whereas the group that did not receive the methionine, they had more problems with the development and the closure of the neural tube. And this time, the 18 hours in the rat embryos, directly relates to 28 days about in human development, which is when we see neural tube closure occurring. And this diagram just kind of gives a brief overview of the closure of neural tubes. And so we assume that because folic acid aids in a conversion of homocysteine to methionine, and methionine is crucial for neural tube development, and homocysteine is a toxin, we see that deficiency in folic acid also is linked to neural tube defects in developing children. Spina bifida and anencephaly are two of the most common neural tube defects that you see associated with folic acid deficiency. Spina bifida is defined as like kind of incomplete closure of the neural tube, and anencephaly is when there's not really closure at all, and the life expectancy for anencephaly rarely exceeds 10 days. And it occurs in about 3 to 4% of births, and due to the importance in the research with folic acid and its potential benefits in prevention of neural tube defects, we've seen a fortification of cereal and grain products with folic acid and other essential vitamins that we can kind of link to a decreased incidence of neural tube defects within the United States and other regions. So in the United States alone, this figure is from the Centers for Disease Control. We see that before fortification in 1995, 1996, the occurrence of neural tube defects was around 4,000. And then between the years 1997 and 1998, the Food and Drug Administration mandated a fortification of folic acid and other essential vitamins and minerals into cereals and other grain products. And we see that after fortification, we have about 3,000 births that were affected with spina bifida and anencephaly, the most common neural tube defects associated with folic acid deficiency. So like I said, in 1998, the folic acid fortification was mandated. The Institute of Medicine suggests about 400 micrograms daily to be taken in for, I guess, proper development of neural tubes within embryos, and also just to maintain a healthy lifestyle. In 2000, Hall and some of her colleagues published research regarding the average intake of folic acid based on diet, and just through diet, we only obtain about 200 micrograms per day of folic acid, and then post-fortification, this number has only increased to around 300 micrograms per day. So we still see that Hall published research stating that the deficiency is still existing even after fortification through diet alone. And so to ensure a proper amount of folic acid is consumed, multivitamin supplementation is encouraged and should be enforced. And so this graph is from different references. We see the decrease in neural tube defects through various regions after fortification. And even with the fortification, we're not seeing the recommended daily amount being consumed of folic acid. But in the United States and even Nova Scotia and China, we see very large decreases in the incidence of neural tube defects. And this was, we assume, from the post-fortification of folic acid into the cereal products and grain products. And so what are some ways to increase awareness? There was a study done in Miami, Florida on a Hispanic population, and there are different groups. Some of them were seeking pregnancy actively, some of them were avoiding pregnancy, and there was a demographic given, like a background information, to determine the effect of public service announcements on the consumption of folic acid. And so just by introducing, this is an example of one of the public service announcements that was given in the area, and because of the public service announcements, we've seen about a 5% increase of consume of folic acid due to the people who are actively seeking pregnancy to ensure the well-being of their child and ensure the prevention of neural tube defects. And so one of the main things that they were enforcing was just that the cereal and grain products were, I guess, infused with the folic acid and other essential vitamins for prevention of defects. And one of the main ways that you can test for, I guess, see where your levels are and where exactly you stand as far as posing a risk for a child with a neural tube defect is through red blood cell folate. And this is kind of where our research is leading to. The minimum red blood cell folate levels that are recommended to ensure a healthy development of an embryo is 906 nanomoles per liter. However, Jensen and his colleagues have done studies showing that an average level is only at about 646 nanomoles per liter. And this includes women who are within the childbearing range who may become pregnant. And folic acid reduces plasma homocysteine. And this is just a graph showing that there's excessive plasma homocysteine concentrations, and a level of about 15 micromoles per liter is that's considered a high end, and we see the prevalence is, there's a lot of people who are kind of high in that. And so this leads us to a question whether a nationwide deficiency in folic acid exists and therefore increases the risk of birthing a child with a neural tube defect. So if it is true that a nationwide deficiency in folic acid exists and we measure the red blood cell folate levels of women of childbearing age throughout a region such as Springfield, Missouri, then we would expect to see results that will support the previous research showing that a deficiency probably exists and therefore can increase the risk for children with neural tube defects. Mandatory fortification is not fully effective, as I stated earlier. Hall and her colleagues had only seen an increase of from about 200 micrograms to 300 micrograms per day in their consumption of folic acid just from diet alone. And so our progress so far is, our initial plans were to include a red blood cell folate analysis in women of childbearing age because this is kind of our target audience for the research. However, we presented a proposal to the Naval Hospital just north of San Diego, and due to some legalities, they weren't able to really help us. And so we kind of switched our focus from actually doing a red blood cell folate analysis to more of a retrospective study, which is kind of in the process right now in Springfield, Missouri. We're working on obtaining data of different blood samples and that have already been taken and analyzing where the levels of folic acid are in women of childbearing age. And so just to conclude, so far we've seen strong support for taking vitamins as kind of a means for ensuring that you get minerals and the vitamins that you need, because you're not going to get all of it from diet alone, we've seen in some research. And folic acid is important for health, especially in women of childbearing age. And one of the reasons we focused on women of childbearing age in the entire population is because a lot of times women aren't going to be, they're not going to know they're pregnant until maybe weeks or a month after conception. And even so, about 50% of pregnancies are unplanned. And so to ensure that women know, the importance of folic acid supplementation, because they need the folic acid for the prevention of neural tube defects in children. Similar to what I cited. And are there any questions that I could answer right now?
When you're talking about 3 to 4% of the births being affected, what exactly does it affect for conception? Like how many conceptions are affected by this?
I haven't read into any research dealing with the percentage of conceptions, because I understand that not all children that are conceived are born.
Yeah.
However, the research we found is only for live births.
Okay, and these are successful births, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I was just wondering about any of the natural sources you might have for folate, like just from regular type of supplement things. It was just interesting because I don't know if our change, like your research using diet process stuff might have an impact or something that's been going on for a while.
We did kind of an inventory. We went to some supermarkets and we're just kind of looking at different food sources, and we found that leafy greens, legumes, and then those are kind of the more natural sources. However, pretty much any enriched bread product or pasta is going to have the folic acid because it's infused with these vitamins and minerals. And then your, I guess, just supplements as well.
You mentioned in the end the importance of getting this information out to young women. Any thoughts on how that might be done? Or?
We've seen there's been limited success with public service announcements down in the Miami, Florida area. And our thoughts so far have been to, once we get research and we have data that supports our hypothesis, then we hope to have brochures maybe in planned pregnancy centers, or to even have a billboard maybe in the Springfield, Missouri area with a public service announcement, because it will greatly increase the awareness and so people would know.